2012. The early era of indie gaming is at its height. In January, a documentary is released that capitalizes on the booming indie game scene called Indie Game the Movie. While it featured games and developers that are still known to this day, like Edmund McMillen, there's one particular individual featured that today has all but dropped off the face of the earth, a man that many people hated, Phil Fish. These days, the legacy of Phil Fish is in something of an odd place. While the game he was working on in the documentary FEZ released to widespread critical and commercial success, Fish himself was a rather polarizing character.
Is it what is about Japanese games that inspired us?
Recent.
Recent
I'm sorry.
They suck.
After a prolonged crash out in 2013, he canceled the announced sequel to FEZ and largely disappeared from the internet. Understandably, this left a rather sour taste in the mouths of many fans of the game and people excited for the sequel. And with the negative reputation Fish brought upon himself, it kind of transferred over to his game. But that's probably unfounded, right? At least to me, FEZ is kind of a strange beast. I've had the game sitting in my library for years myself. I've tried a couple times to get into it, but I've never gotten very far. All of this combined, the reputation, the legacy, and the fact that it's been sitting in my library for so long is exactly why I want to ask the question, was FEZ any good? Okay, to start, this is Gomez. He lives in a small village of other little critters that look just like him, all in their quirky early 2010s glory. They live in a two-dimensional existence where everything they perceive is flat. Don't think about it too hard. Today isn't just any other day for Gomez. Today, he has been summoned to the peak of the village by the village elder. After falling to his death a few times and intruding into all his neighbors' houses, he finally makes it to the top, where the old man bestows upon Gomez the funniest thing imaginable. A FEZ. If you're too young to remember, this was, at one time, peak humor. But the FEZ isn't just there to be quirky. No. Once this silly little hat lands on Gomez's head, he gains the ability to shift dimensions and see everything from a new perspective. He gets so excited doing this for the first time that he breaks this funny cube stabilizing the universe. So now it's up to Gomez and his fourth dimensional companion Dot to explore the world and collect the smaller cubes that the big cube broke up into. I have no idea where this little thing came from and it won't go away. It's a direct setup to a game with little in regards to story, but it still manages to be unique enough to actually get you motivated to see what happens next. And if the setup isn't enough to get your interest piqued, how nice the game looks surely must be. I'm sure you've noticed it by now because you presumably have eyes, but this game has beautiful sprite art. Around this time, it was very common for indie games to feature pixelated graphics, and it's something I miss a lot. Not that there are no games coming out with pixel-based art styles these days, but there's something that feels uniquely of the era about how FEZ looks, if you know what I mean. This is still firmly in the era of every pixel-based indie game trying its best to look like Zelda, but I really don't say that as a negative. In all honesty, I do miss it. The pixels here are simple, but a lot is done with it to give the game an insanely charming look. It feels lonely, and the landscapes are incredibly old and mysterious. Part of it feels like architecture that was constructed by nobody, and has just always kind of been there. But other areas clearly once held inhabitants that made their own structures. The attention to detail is impressive, and all of the scenery is really memorable and really fits the theme of a strange journey through a strange land. And that translates to every angle you'll be swapping around in. It's really impressive how FEZ seamlessly blends its unique mechanics with the world, and you really are seeing every angle from a new perspective. So based on this alone, game's great. Sign off on it, it's good. But pretty visuals and good atmosphere ain't all it takes to make a game good. Although admittedly, it's a pretty good sign. One thing that is commonly true for early 2010s indie games is that they basically all have really memorable music, and FEZ is no exception to this. The game's atmosphere is perfectly encapsulated in the game's chiptune soundtrack, which was composed by Disasterpeace, who would go on to compose several other soundtracks for both games and movies. The music is varied and seems to come heaviest when you least expect it. Disasterpeace stated he wanted music that could ebb, flow, and breathe with the player, and with that, there are portions that are completely devoid of music, only for a synthy tune to come from somewhere in the distance to remind you that you're on an adventure. and that you're alone. As mentioned earlier, some of the architecture feels like it's just kinda always been there, and the soundtrack both embodies and amplifies that ominous feeling. The music and the game go perfectly hand in hand, with the resulting atmosphere all coming together to make a lonely journey an emotional one. But not only the music will be gracing your ears as you cross dimensions, and you'll be hearing a few different sound effects on your travels. Like the music, the sound effects tend to go with a less is more kind of approach, and it serves to make every interaction stand out. The thing you're going to be hearing probably more than anything is the sound of rotating the dimensions. It's satisfying, thankfully, because you'll be hearing it a lot. The sounds are good and varied, but I feel like I've heard a lot of them before. Pretty sure it was from Hyper Light Drifter, which would make sense since Disasterpiece scored that game too. I bring that up to say that the sound effects feel very 2010s indie game. I know I keep using that, but if you have played games like this, then you completely understand what I mean. They're minimal and some are a bit non-traditional, but I can still very clearly hear them in my head as I write this part of the script. Someone please help me, I can no longer hear myself think. So, okay, I gave you the basics, but this is where the real meat and potatoes of the video comes into play. Pretty colors and nice sounds are cool and do indicate quality, but those things matter less than an alligator at a crocodile convention when it comes to whether or not the game itself is worth playing. Fuck, cut that. Alright, Gomez, your time to shine, buddy. Show us what you got. With his mighty and titular FEZ, Gomez is able to gain a new perspective on things. Literally. After waking up from absolutely demolishing the single thing that holds the universe together, he can now shift his view to another perspective. Everything is still on one plane, and you're going to be utilizing this shifting ability to change the perspectives of each level, coming up with new and creative ways to maneuver through the often difficult and spaced out terrain. A dead end on one end of a level becomes a path to the goal by just switching perspectives. This mechanic is intrinsically what each level will be structured by, and puzzles are creative and require outside-the-box thinking. Nearly every puzzle you'll tackle is something you'll be able to solve with pure thinking alone, and nothing feels cheap, which is asking a lot with some of the other puzzle games I've played. I do want to clarify that the word nearly is purposeful, as there are a few puzzles that require hints or information given to you at different points of the game. For instance, there are several points where you'll come across codes that look like this. Each of these symbols corresponds to a certain controller input. You'll need a key to decipher them, and reading them is not so straightforward either. However, the way to read these and decipher them is hidden in the game. Same thing with some of the pillars you'll find that have the same characters that the cube spoke to you in at the start of the game. You just gotta know where to look and have the patience to decode it all, or you can just look it up. This game is almost a decade and a half old, and there's plenty of guides on it if you don't feel like learning a new language today. So while FEZ does up the ante by having complex methods required for puzzle solving, it doesn't ask you to do anything that the game hasn't presented you with. On your journey, you and Gomez are going to be collecting 32 cubes, which are pieces of that big cube that blew up. Collecting these is going to be your main objective on your quest. Kind of really your only objective. Certain doors that block your way require a set number of cubes to enter through, so there are natural gates that prevent you from accessing the entire world from the get-go and serve to give you a sense of progression. The whole world is interconnected, even to the point of some areas having doors that only open if you've found its pair somewhere else in the world. There are a few focal points of interconnectivity that serve as junction worlds to other areas, and they often have similar theming as you travel through them. That said, there's still a ton of individuality in every screen, and everywhere you go will present you with new scenery that is on brand with the rest of the area, but is unique enough that the levels aren't easily confused with one another. Not only will you be collecting normal gold cubes, there are blue anti-cubes that usually have less straightforward methods of obtaining. There are 32 of them as well, but any that you pick up along the way will also count as cubes to access the ending. But in all honesty, the drive for continuing with the game isn't all the collecting or even the puzzles. It's really just wanting to explore this bizarre and surprisingly lively world. It's continuing on this solitary journey that you've set out on for the sake of exploring the world. As you shift perspectives, there's new things to see around literally every corner, and this game rarely, if ever, disappoints. Now, here's where we answer the question of whether or not this game was any good, and my answer to that might be a little more complex than you might think. FEZ has always occupied an odd place in my brain. I got it sometime a couple years after it had already come out, and the fallout with old Fishy Boy had already gone down. But for some reason, I just never got far in it. I tried a few times throughout the years, but it just never hooked me like I was hoping it would. I always had it downloaded on my computer and even on my Steam Deck on the off chance that I finally decided to sit down and play it, and it just never happened. Because of that, and coupled with the fact that it was so lauded and from an era of gaming that is very near and dear to my here, it became this almost mythological immortalization in my brain. I don't know that it was necessarily high expectations, it was more of a sense of reverence. Like it was this holy relic that I'd like to keep around. That's intense, sorry. So in all honesty, I used this video as an excuse to finally make myself play it, but I did my best to go in with an open mind. I tried to go in with no expectations, my only one being an indie game from the early 2010s, and that's pretty much exactly what I got. At the time, the game was revolutionary. It was a critical and commercial smash hit that, despite the fact that it was made by an absolute basket case, is still beloved by many. But while it was unique when it first came out, it really does stand more as a relic of its time, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It takes you back to a simpler time, when games were simpler, and so was just about everything else. So while FEZ may have lost some of its uniqueness over time, it was still the first to do a lot of things that tons of games that came after emulated. And like the game teaches, a shift in perspective doesn't always have to mean that the previous perspective was incorrect. It's just another way of looking at it. So yeah, I do think FEZ was good anyway, and it stands on its own in gaming history. I think it's worth it just for the journey it takes you on. Thanks for watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you liked it, and check out one of my other videos on the screen now. I'll see you next time. Bye!